Hands.
Okay,
Right,
so.
right.
Hands.
Okay, so, right. Good, we missed that error.
You can hit the button.
Oh, light should go green, there you go.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so all comments and questions of the applicant must be directed through the chair. The first public comment period will be closed at the appropriate time, and members of the board will be given the opportunity to ask questions. A second public comment will be open for the purpose of hearing new and relevant information only. That will then be closed, and if members have no further questions or comments, the public hearing will be closed. At that point, the board begins deliberation. No further comment from the applicant or the public. As board members, we can ask for clarification, but not new information. We will then, the board, do findings of fact and then vote to either approve the application, deny the application, or approve with conditions. And once again, an affirmative vote of at least 3 members is required for approval. All right, so I ended up reading all of it anyway.
That's perfect.
All right, so you start then, correct, Shenley?
Right, yes, yes, ma'am. I'll go ahead and just give a quick overview, if you like, not of the project, but just why you're here and then what you need to follow through on. So this is, I'll open it up. This is a project, a public hearing. It's required by zoning ordinance chapter 290, 6.6, changes in non-conforming structures in the shoreland areas. And this particular property is located at 7 Dillingham Point Road. And you have all that information in the packet. The applicant has provided a complete packet and staff has determined that it's complete. It's before your review because the applicant is proposing to demolish the structure on site and reconstruct a new structure in its place. So that triggers your ZBA review. And the other trigger is that they're proposing to construct a new foundation. And both those two issues are what trigger it to be reviewed by the ZBA to make a determination of whether it can be rebuilt in place or can it be moved to the greatest extent practical. So that's in the code. So, and when you do make your decisions and when you're evaluating the project, you can use the criteria that are contained in 290.6.6C2, and that's in your packet. And you have a sheet also in case you want to refer to it. So that's your task tonight, is just to review the proposed and you're going to either approve with conditions, or deny the applicant's request to locate the reconstructed structure and new foundation. I'm believing it's in the same, they're requesting to be in the same location as the existing structure, and that it would not be practical to rebuild or relocate in another location on the property. So the applicant who's here tonight, he's tasked with demonstrating to you all that the structure cannot be relocated further back from the shoreline setbacks due to the constraints on site per the requirements of the chapter 290 zoning. So essentially, the applicant's here to do a presentation to address those criteria that you need to use to evaluate whether they can or cannot move it back. And if you are familiar with the site plan, I believe, and the applicant will show you that it's just a portion of the building that is encroaching in the 75-foot setback. And that is the only real trigger why it's before you, other than they want to replace it and put the new foundation as stated. So I think that's pretty much a nutshell for what, and I gave you the new deed to put in there to enter that into the record, and the memo, and my staff memo, we can enter that into the record as well. So that's my testimony part of it. Okay. And that's it. And then the next.
Can I ask you one question about that? And I could ask the applicant too,
Mhm.
but it may be important for them, but is it important for us to know that the 2 lots are combined?
Yes,
It is important now. It does factor into your evaluation, I would think, yes.
if it
Absolutely.
was two lots still, it wouldn't pass, right? That's my understanding from reading the,
It wouldn't have passed as an accessory building. 'cause it
right,
doesn't have
that's
any
right.
living-
If it was two separate lots, this would be null and void.
Right, as it's currently construed.
Was,
right.
yes, now it's configured,
Right, even if it was two lots, they would still have to go to you.
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, make sure I understand what you're
But
saying.
it couldn't be an accessory building, right, without being part of it?
Not on the lot, but you wouldn't even be considering that. That would be for us like later for building and zoning down the line during permitting. But that's not an issue but that's true.
Things like the roof line and all that, are they,
That comes into planning to us when it
Yeah.
comes for building permits. That's a good point. Right,
right, so, I mean,
absolutely.
so as far as we know, then the building height, size is pretty similar or a little smaller than the existing structure that's there now.
Well, he will be able to probably give you more information on that, the applicant, but that's something that we look at later as far as setbacks, as far as height and bulk and all that, when it comes to permitting the actual building
I
permit.
know that, but it should be a part of the conversation that we have.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, good, thanks.
perfect, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you,
okay,
Jen.
good point. Yeah.
So we'd like to have the applicant make his presentation, provide us with testimony.
Happy to do that. Is the board comfortable with me just sitting while I go through this?
Technically, I think that's what nobody can say anything from the floor, but I don't see a problem unless, because there's nobody in the audience who might not be able to
These will
hear
pick them
you.
up anyway.
He's got a
These
speaker.
cameras.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
My name's Stephen Moore. Our company is Moore and Sheridan Landscape Architects. You'll notice that all the paperwork is signed by Tanya Sheridan. The other half of the company, coincidentally, my wife, but moving on. She couldn't be here tonight. We have been working with the Reeds for about 8 years. We started with their house at 10 Dillingham, and then we worked on their guest house up on Bayview. And then we were part of that team that took care of the boathouse for them. And so we've been talking on and off with John and Cynthia about other projects and things they wanted to do. And when number 7 came up for sale quietly, John and Cynthia had it in mind that they wanted to have this accessory structure. They wanted a place for a studio, for a reading room for John, and then overflow space and a greenhouse. We went over with the team, our structural engineer, Albert Putnam, and a representative from the architectural firm from Safer Buccellato Architects. We walked through the house with John and Cynthia, and the sense was we might have code issues here, but we think this would work for those pieces that they wanted to have in this accessory structure. So we walked through and they made a deal with the family to buy that piece of property. So from the start, the thinking was just acquire the property. Let's go through a full assessment of the structure and see what it's going to take to turn this into the building they wanted. We spent, I'm going to say 3 months looking at the building, trying to figure out what's the condition of the foundation, what's the condition of the wall, how far off of current building code are we. Cold Mountain Builders is involved, so Cold Mountain Builders was helping us understand what are the cost implications of bringing this into code. And at the end of 2 months, the decision was the cost to get this building back into shape through the cracked foundation, through the windows, through the glazing, through the roof, through the insulation, from the electrical system. It just couldn't, it wasn't economically feasible to capture that. And so we set about looking at this, thinking about tonight's meeting is what the honest truth was. How do we build something that makes sense, that works, and if we have to go before a ZBA, what's a defensible position for why we're doing what we're doing? We decided that the greenhouse shouldn't be attached to the building. we decided that the greenhouse could sit away and up in the corner and not interfere with the buildable zone. On this diagram, the main house is here. The full 2.32 acres is stretched out here, so the dock is here. That's their little one-car garage. What's shaded in pink on that drawing are all the unbuildable areas because of setbacks. So you can see where the house and building occupy much of this. The existing house that we're talking about is right here. There's a utility corridor through here, which I'll talk about in greater detail with you, that defines some of that lateral expansion. We tucked the greenhouse back in that far corner. After looking at the ability to put a garage back there and not have the garage in here, the decision was the greenhouse makes more sense because we didn't want to pave and build all the way in there. And we didn't quite have the width to fit a garage into that space. And so as we looked and evaluated this, we came back to this idea that ideally we sit within that current footprint. Part of that thinking was led by us in three ways. There's these incredible red oaks, 160, 150-year-old red oaks that show up in the photographs. We connected with David Bragg and Kyle Rosenberg, our arborists, and we were able to define a root protection zone where we knew we didn't want to get into any construction, filling, or alteration of that ground plane within that root protection zone of those red oaks, because our feeling was they were part of the essential character of this, that part of what John stipulated. So we have our root protection zones here that define our ability to move laterally. So we had very limited capability to move east-west. This utility corridor, when this was built, there is a water service line that comes down and feeds them. There was a second 6-inch water line that the Reeds installed and put a hydrant right here. And then their water line comes through there, their force main line comes through there, and their underground electrical all come down through that blue shaded zone. It shows on that plan. In the past 10 days, we've been through discussions with the water department. And based on the water department, we're moving that hydrant right up here because the water department wants to see it here. And they've coordinated that with the fire department, so we know that's there. We're capping that 6-inch water line, but we are rerunning new water services within that 6-inch pipe because we don't want to tear the site up. So we're using essentially that 6-inch ductile iron pipe as our sleeve for our new water lines that are going to feed this and then reconnect this to that, because this feed came off at the end. So we're running all new services through that. So that blue edge right there is the edge of the trench that was excavated for that electrical service that is closest to that building. So you can see between the foundation and that scale is about 5.5 feet between the base of the existing house and the side of that trench. So the hope at the time was, as I said, to capture that house, but based on all those conditions that we saw, we ended up realizing we need to take it down and rebuild it. We talked through that process with the build team to understand how to limit on-site disturbance to the maximum amount possible. And we were adamant throughout that the trees be protected and that we not get too close to that side of that electrical trench, which then sets off the cascading electrical force main 6-inch ductile iron pipe. The other piece we were concerned about, it was not tearing up and disturbing existing vegetation or having to remove any vegetation to make this happen. So when we developed an approach plan to this new house, we figured out that the best way to deal with this was to take the house down, remove it, and then actually work with the excavator from the interior basement space and peel the walls away to expose, if you will, the side walls where the new foundations were going, and then work entirely within that existing footprint, particularly in the non-conforming areas and by the red oaks, so that we didn't disturb more than we absolutely had to in that area. Based on those criteria, we, meaning earthwork, Cold Mountain, us, and structural, took it to the architects and said, here's the envelope. And with the Reed's direction, the Reed said, put something back in there that makes sense and has a feel and a character that's right for the neighborhood. We don't need to replicate the pointed firs, but we need to make it look like it belongs. And that's where we got to with this building that you saw, that you see on the submission. As Shenley already mentioned, the building footprint is essentially the same size with a little bit of expansion for the garage in the area outside of the setback. But the overall change in that building square footage is tiny. The non-conforming section, in other words, that section that's within that setback. In your packet, there was a separate diagram that illustrated that in some detail, that non-conforming section. That actually gets a little bit smaller where that sits within the 75-foot setback. Bear with me while I pull that up. Apparently, it's on the register because it was one of 5 cottages built by the Dillingham family. So it made it into the register because it was one of 5 cottages and one of the first. If I turn this so that this matches that, that's that blow up of that piece of the building that sits within the 75-foot setback. So that's that area of the building. And again, we studied that. We had it surveyed. We checked overhangs. We checked the piers underneath, and had come back to the architects, giving them that definition of that building and where it had to sit. And based on all of that, we came back with this particular plan. And the thinking behind this is that could we move it back a little further? The short and direct answer to you is we could. We could move it 2 feet, 2.5 feet, and still leave our utility trench in place. The problem was when we did that, when we looked at that on paper, that 2-foot direct slide back gets us into that root protection zone in an area where we think the roots are reasonably concentrated. And equally important to us, by sliding it back out of that current foundation footprint, we got about a 15% increase in the amount of disturbed area because now we're taking up additional slope on the south and we have to backfill and deal with everything on the water side of this. And so there was a general level of comfort leaving it right where it sits. But in all candor, as I said, we could move it back 2 feet. We just weren't comfortable doing that because of that oak tree and because of the importance of that oak tree. So I'm just being very honest and straightforward with you that that was our decision as a team and Cynthia and John's decision. So I think we went through in some detail in our application materials and worked with Shenley to get this refined to come before you. And based on what we could see, given the size of the lot, the configuration of the non-conforming part and what we want to do, that repositioning within that footprint was our best alternative for the physical location. When it came to building massing and design, we were thoughtful about keeping this thing down a little lower. Same footprint, same relationship to the harbor, but drop the ridge line. Obviously, we took out one of the there was a tower there that was part of the original pointed firs. So we've been thoughtful about shrinking and shaping this thing so that it's going to look like it should look to sit there in that area, in that historic district, and have the right relationship to 10 Dillingham, to their house. And as we said in the application materials, that driveway that comes in and serves their house, the little driveway, Dillingham Point Road ends here, the right of way. There's a driveway that comes in, serves Barbara Spalding and her family here. This is the Spalding's house. Continues down. That little turning radius makes all their trucks sit up here and park out there. Part of the benefit of this lot is we could put that a proper size turning radii back here, outside shoreline, connected back into Dillingham. Give them that second garage space that they wanted, but create that functional looking yard here and not get into soil disturbance or changing this layout with that building position. So it let us meet those functional needs for their use of the property, of the overall property. And as you've already discussed, part of the thinking was it's just an accessory structure. Sorry, it is an accessory structure. It's not a principal dwelling unit. And therefore, they have to be merged and they have to work that way functionally. So last thing as I wrap up, the slope of that is somewhat gentle. It comes off to the house, to the existing house at 2 or 3%. And then as you move on the harbor side, that slope starts to roll off and down to the shore. It's 5 or 6% as it comes right around the house, particularly around that western oak tree. We just finished doing riprap restoration of some riprap that was destroyed in the storms in 23, 24. So that riprap was permitted by Gartley and Dorsey and came with the property. So the Slocum signed over that permit. We transferred the permit and got the permit from the DEP and from you folks to rebuild the riprap and stabilize the shore. We also got the DEP permit for soil disturbance within the 75-foot zone for this project, knowing that no matter where we landed, we were going to have to do something in that area. So we had the DEP permit in the package for you, and that riprap work is done. The greenhouse is still in process. It'll be wrapped up in another 2 or 3 weeks. But the essence of this is to ask this board for those approvals to, as Shenley said, A, replace that full foundation because structural has determined it can't be salvaged. And then secondly, put that porch and those spaces back in where they have been in that, within that 75-foot setback zone. So I could go on in greater detail, but I'm going to turn it back to the board to have you answer questions or let me know if there's anything I missed.
I think we begin with the public.
Well,
Yes, sir.
did you want to entertain, entering into the record, somebody make a motion to accept the presentation and staff's memo?
Yes,
So
thank you.
second
Yeah,
He
Yeah,
presented.
what he presented right before you and staff's
to accept it
presentation.
and enter it in the record.
Yeah, and I think John's gonna,
Are you going to make the motion, John?
Unless you want to.
No, please, go ahead.
Steve?
Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. Matt, I didn't ask. Okay, make a motion to accept for the record, the assisted
Or planning.
planner property deeds, what you done to me.
Property deeds and
You-
the planner's
Memo,
memo.
there
and
we
the-
go.
And the deed
Well,
that's
you should've
submitted
put the whole
for.
thing lying
Okay, I
there.
didn't put it
Yeah.
everywhere.
So memo dated June 26, 2025, and the applicant's submissions consisting of applicant package dated May 27, 2025, that contains all of which are outlined in the covered page of the packet.
Right.
All right.
Perfect.
So you're making the motion?
Yeah, I made a
Can I have a
motion.
second?
I would second that.
You didn't like my motion?
No, I did. I just wanted to make sure that that was a motion. No, it's a great motion.
Thank you.
Great. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Motion passes 4-0. All right, so we actually start with questions from the board. And so, John, do you want to start?
This house, the existing house for Mrs. Reed, that's on the city sewer?
Number 10.
Number 10 is, they went through the process, worked with the town, and it's connected by force main to the municipal sewer up in.
So they went
Bacon.
up Dillingham Road with it then?
They did, exactly.
Okay, and then you're gonna tie this building into that same
Thank you.
system. And then this building isn't considered, the one that's coming down, an historic structure by any means. So we don't have a problem,
Oh,
you
okay,
know?
that's coming.
Well,
That's
we-
another body.
That's-
We went through it pretty thoroughly, and in our historic board presentation, we documented that there's very little of that historic structure left.
What year is that building, do you know?
I have two conflicting dates, 1850 and 1870. And the character defining features that made it go onto the register
Mhm.
were first and foremost the wraparound porches, because it was porches on all four sides. And the second was one of 5 of the Dillingham houses, the Dillingham family houses.
Mhm.
And that seemed, and it was the first one. So that seemed to be what gave it that National Register legs to stand on. The only thing that remains of that historic building is that one bit of porch that's right out in the non-conforming area.
Okay,
That's been modified, but everything else has been modified so that nothing really remains of that original historic structure.
Have you already had the hearing with the Historic Preservation Group? No.
July 16th.
It's going to be July 14th, and it's a public informational meeting only. This town code requires that any demolition of a historic structure goes through a 120-day demolition delay. And so the applicant must go in front of the Historic Resource Committee and ask, I don't know if they're going to ask for a waiver, or if they don't need a waiver, but they still go in front of the Historic Resource
But
Committee.
does that committee or group make a decision to agree or not agree with you about whether there's any of its historic value left?
That's up to the Historic
It's-
Resources Committee.
But they
to decide.
can make that
They
decision.
can make that decision.
They can make recommendations, but they have no, there's nothing in the code that can give them teeth to say,
They don't make
okay,
a decision.
right, exactly.
Other questions? Yeah, Matt?
Was there a structural engineer involved for the foundation?
Albert Putnam of Albert Putnam Associates was involved.
Is there a
Yes.
report or anything for us for that? Says it's not sound or it shouldn't be built on?
I have an email thread that I can submit if that's what, but we did. We had Albert Putnam of Albert Putnam Associates in there to go through and look at it.
Okay.
And told us cracks. The piers are moving and leaning.
Okay.
And so I did not submit that.
Be interesting to, when you say square footage is minimal, 100 square feet, 20 square feet in the actual building? You use the term the square footage of the building because of the garage. And that square footage change was minimal?
It is. And the overall square footage is just slightly less. The non-conforming section is 10 feet smaller. In other words, we've reduced the square footage in that non-conforming area by 10.71 square feet.
Square feet. Because when I scaled it, it looked it looked like it was slightly more non-conforming than the existing building.
We would never do that. No, we've been really careful about that in terms of the square footage. We've gone through and calculated so that we've held the one corner. We've surveyed in the one corner where we're closest. And then when we squared the whole building up,
Was this surveyed,
it
so we know
pulled
where
the
it was?
face back a little bit more. Because what's there is not square. The building that
Right,
is sitting there is not square.
right.
But in the non-conforming area, we know factually we're 10.71
Square
Square
feet
feet.
less.
less.
Okay,
On the overall building itself, we're slightly larger on the footprint,
Mhm.
but I'm not messing with figures here. The actual square footage of this building is less than the existing one because we don't have that second floor.
okay. Then I would ask about the footprint of the
Yes.
building. Yes, and you're saying that that is less non-conforming.
Correct. That's what we've said in there and documented in what we submitted,
Okay,
is that the non-conforming piece is 10.71 square feet less.
right. And the planning of this building came after the entrance adjustments to the utility corridor? Because I mean,
Yes,
so the plan, the idea came for a non-conforming structure after the utilities were placed for,
thank
The
you.
residents.
Those utilities were in there.
okay,
And then this replacement building came after that. Those utilities were put in as part of the work for 10 Dillingham.
yes, okay. Because
We're bound by that. The
Right.
only change was that 6-inch water main
Mhm.
has had the hydrant moved.
Back up to
Back
the,
up.
right,
So we no longer, the question was, do we just keep feeding everything with the 6-inch
6 line.
line? Our sense was, and the water department's sense was, that's silly. Cap
Right.
it,
right,
sleeve it.
right. I mean, I would have had some questions if this building was laid out and planned as we've received it, and you went ahead with the utilities in that particular place anyway. That's just what I was trying to find out, exactly the procedure, the
Understood.
chronology of it.
Understood.
So that went in a while ago.
When 10 Dillingham was built, the water main, the force main, and the first electrical line went in. So 7 years ago.
Mhm. And that's
before
never
this was
been
acquired.
paved back in. It was left with just the base coat of pavement while you were
Correct.
working there. Right, okay.
And it's always been that same width. I have a question. I'm probably the least engineer experienced person on this board right now. Can you tell me, if you moved it those 2 feet, what do you gain? I know the reasons you said you didn't do it, but what do you gain in terms of non-conforming area?
In terms of decreasing the non-conformity,
What did it do that? I guess I'm just asking.
48 square feet. We've reduced it 10. If we slit it to 2 feet, it becomes 58 square feet, not 10 square feet, because we get, that 2 feet yields 48 square feet.
Okay, so 48 square feet, but the trade-off is the oak.
The trade-off is, in our professional opinion and that of our arborists, we risk compromising that easternmost red oak tree zone, that root protection zone.
How did they determine that? Do you know?
When we went out and looked at it, we looked up at the crown and looked at the drip edge. And then we went through and used an auger and checked for roots. Most red oaks are taproot trees, but not always, particularly because they respond to different soil and ledge conditions. We're shallow to ledge there. So what we saw in that area between the tree trunk and the house was a lot more fibrous shallow roots, which led us to believe it wasn't a taproot tree. It was a shallow tree, and we saw evidence of those heavy, dense, fibrous growth from the red oaks in both locations. And we have as an additional bit of information, we have a pretty rigorous tree preparation and protection plan, to the point where David Bragg's going in November to do the initial pruning. Then next spring, we're going to go through and do a little bit of in-ground supplemental feeding of the trees and a light aeration. And then that following spring, we'll do another pruning. So we're trying to reduce tree mass, the vegetative growth of tree mass, to give it, even with our best protections, it still stresses these big old mature trees.
And
And then-
given the amount of attention that you've given to that issue, maybe you could just use your finger to show, if I understand you correctly, the excavator is going to get into the cellar hole,
Right, that excavator is going to move in and it's sitting in there.
and how is it going to access it, over what kind of ground?
It's coming in on that driveway and then through the existing building basement and into that wall. And then we'll be sitting there, and then we use a small dump, a skidder dump, to peel the concrete apart, open that up, and clear that up on those two edges.
So you'll be disturbing the area that's white in that diagram.
Some in that white, but most of that will fall right within that. We're gonna use small equipment to work right within that.
But you're excavating in the tree root protection zone on that corner. You're getting into that
Right,
tree
that's
protection
right.
zone with an
Just
excavator.
only where that foundation exists. We're not letting that excavator into that zone right there.
The corner of the house will be in the zone.
The corner will, but it'll be that corner that's already there. And so working with that same Albert Putnam, we know on that edge, we're gonna be somewhere between 2 and 3 feet out into that root protection zone when we peel that concrete wall down. So we know that. And again, we have a written protocol, not that the board cares about this, but we peel the wall down. We use a compressor and compressed air to expose the roots, because we think there's roots right against that wall. And then we go through and we cut all those roots off, then protect it with wet burlap and get the concrete people in there very quickly. So we're not going to peel that foundation apart until we know we have our concrete subs lined up in place.
Okay. And you're assured that that amount of cutting of the roots for an old tree like that will not endanger the tree, or is it a calculated risk?
That's what our arborists are saying. We have a pair of them.
John, did you have another question?
Well, I did.
Sorry.
Don't remember. First place, we ran across a situation like this a while back. It was a lakefront property, but it was red oak trees, same thing, house. But we made them put a arborist on duty, if I recall, to make sure the tree could be, you're gonna live by the tree, you're gonna die by the tree, so to speak, make sure they live. So I know the Reeds are very good conservative. They've done great work. Yeah, not on.
Sorry.
Jeez.
It's the best thing you said.
No, thanks. Well, I mean, I grew up in that neighborhood. I remember all these, so it's kind of hard, a little nostalgia there, but I'm trying to remember the house that was there or how it was, because it was there for a long time and spoke about, right?
Exactly.
Right. I wish I could remember what I was going to ask you the first time it went. Gone. Sorry. I didn't
It may
mind.
come by.
Where's,
Yeah, about midnight.
where's the existing septic and well? I don't see them on the layout here.
Thank you. The existing well is right there. Just a little black dot, we didn't label it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
The existing septic is sitting right alongside, sat right next to here. So the greenhouse is just slightly above it.
Okay.
So that existing leach field doesn't go into this other protection zone for the tree?
No,
No excavation there? Do we know that for sure? Somebody, yeah.
Right.
we dug test pits and checked for it, Matt. We looked at it.
Okay.
The we being Kevin O'Donnell and Sunset Knoll, that there are earthwork people.
I'll look at the septic plan.
I know that. Well,
Steve, do you have another question?
No, I'm,
yeah. Yeah, yeah, up in here. Because I'm concerned that, yeah. Well, I knew what one of the things I was gonna,
Okay,
sorry,
go ahead.
my
No,
mind's,
no,
it's been a long day.
yeah, it has,
So when you're working over here on this non-conforming section, what are you gonna do about erosion and stuff? Because you're right, it is slope for the harbor. So what is the plan to maintain, to make sure the soils don't go into that?
We had a erosion control plan with this, 2 measures. We're putting a silt fence about 10 feet away down gradient. That's a continuous silt fence. We're covering that entire surface with erosion control mix between that and the foundation.
Mhm.
And then right at the foundation, we're installing a silt sock. So just around that perimeter, about 2 feet out from that existing perimeter, we're putting a silt sock. And again, that'll be worked from the inside, peeling back. And that was part of that, that's part of the DEP submission that's on file with the town that we had to submit to secure that permit by rule for soil disturbance.
But I think the question's actually on both applications, isn't it? The DEP plus the town's erosion controls,
Yeah, it's going
so
to
that
be
we both
addressed.
ask the
They
same.
will.
It'll be addressed.
And should we clear these hurdles, that'll be in our site plan and building submission to the town for our building permit.
And forgive me, I haven't been down in a while. So
So
when you come down Dillingham Point and you go underground from the end of the road to the house, right? So is it, whether it come from poles on the road, or is it further up the street underground?
further up the street. So
Back-
What's the main?
a bunch of the work we've done in the street opening permit that the town, the select board gave us, we were back up 1 pole.
Okay. But the town has as-bills for what's in the town right away?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Not just
We,
that.
we have it. Mark Ingraham's surveyed all that. We've mapped
roughly
that out
200 feet,
and we submitted it.
200 feet. Just a question. In the design and conceptual talking, planning of this, was there any mention about sea level rise or any of that stuff that we've been forced to?
Absolutely, yes. This is all recorded, right? If we're looking that hard at trees, we're going to look at a lot more basic stuff like sea level rise. Thank you. We did. We looked at the FEMA flood elevation, the updated FEMA flood elevation, which is 16. We looked at our basement elevation, our bottom of footing elevation, and we looked at that projected 2.5 to 3 feet of sea level rise. And what we did is you haven't seen this, but I've seen it because we continue to work on it. We've lifted that bottom of footing up so that the bottom of footing is 4.2 feet above the projected sea level rise. And it's another 9 inches above that FEMA flood hazard line. So all of our bottom of footing and our pipe and everything are up out of that FEMA 100-year flood hazard and the anticipated sea level rise.
Thank you.
And that's the most recent estimate, is that
That
correct?
is correct.
Because I understand there are newer hydrology reports that are coming out. And
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure how current that estimate is. And I know it's not an exact science, but
Right, but that is that current projection, that's NOAA and DEP for this section of the Maine coast.
Matt, did you have another question? You just looked like you did.
I kind of, yes. So in these pictures here, I don't know if everybody has the same ones. I mean, the picture showing all kinds of earthwork already around the house and around the trees and,
That was the tracking course for the equipment to get over to the riprap.
okay,
That riprap, and so what you're seeing there in that tracking, there were well drilling mats that were set down there that Sunset Knoll tracked over. And there should be, in those pictures, there's an orange fence, there's an orange
yep,
protection
around the
fence.
tree.
That was our initial tree protection zone to push the equipment tracking out of that tree zone.
And that was done this spring or?
Yeah, I want to say, yeah, it was spring.
Okay.
I want to say they started it in March because there was still frost, but we still had to put down those well drilling mats
Okay.
to track over it.
Okay with that, Matt? You have another question?
Oh, I'm good.
Oh, okay, for now. So there are at least 3 members of the public, 1 in person and 2 on screen. How do we go to, since Kimberly showed up first and then Barbara, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
I'm actually watching on Zoom.
Oh, so you're Barbara? Okay, and
Yay, you're here. Which one's giving testimony?
what, is Kimberly online?
Kim works for me.
Ah,
She's just watching.
okay.
Okay.
All right, then, Barbara, do you have a question?
Not at this moment.
Okay. First round. Do I close that?
Yeah.
Yeah, close the first round. And now comments and questions from the board again? No, done?
Well, the biggest thing to me is, and as you pointed out earlier, that the design of the building looks like it belongs there, not a glass granite monstrosity, you know what I mean? I'm sure you're not it's gonna be right. Because I've seen what he's done in the past and done a very good job. But that's one of my main concerns, because it is.
Is what it will look like,
Yeah,
whether it
because it's an
fits?
older section of the community, some of the old buildings. A lot of them are gone now. But that's all.
If,
Go ahead, go ahead.
if this board was to vote this down, this is a hypothetical question, you could come back and modify this as a dwelling, and it would be a much easier thing to pass by. Is that,
I don't, what would make it easier? I don't think so, now that they've combined the lots. I don't, Shenley, you would know, would
I
it make
mean,
it easier?
if it's, they have enough square footage in the lot now to have 2 residents on 1 lot, because
But would approving this building in terms of,
approving the,
what you're saying, Steve, is if they're not going to take anything down, if it doesn't activate that section of the code, would it be easier?
would it be easier? That's what that's,
Right, but you've said that the foundation is not in good shape, so you might still have to do something to the foundation.
Yeah, our reading of the conditions or what we see out there was that foundation has to be replaced, period. And that sets one of those pieces off in terms of review before the board.
so it would have to go
You still have to
before,
come here.
it would still be non-compliant, it would still have to
foundation.
come back.
yeah.
Okay.
Matt,
I have 2 concerns, questions.
Yeah.
One is are our packages considered complete and accurate? The packages we received, this was not 1 lot. So a lot of the information has changed. So that's just a
Right.
question. Are we working with a complete packet?
Your packet's complete, and the drawing that was
drawing
submitted
shows,
showed it as unified. This was just a legal,
we just
like,
didn't have the deed that
Yeah, I just
showed
wanna
that
make
it's
sure.
done.
Yeah.
And I
Good
guess
question.
my concern,
Mhm.
my biggest concern is the utility corridor have enough weight to have a non-conforming house
Stay that way.
stay that way and be less non-conforming
That's
by
what-
10 square feet?
Well, that's what
Does
I
the
was asking.
utility corridor justify that?
That's the question I came in with.
Okay.
So And I don't know how, I mean, could anything be done to that utility corridor that would improve our concern or address our concern?
Well, the short answer is we could relocate the utilities in it. But the downside of that from our perspective is that anything we move back further endangers, in our professional opinion, the root protection zone of that one tree. So that's the balance that we're asking the board to consider. The value that we put on the tree and what our team is looking at for tree preservation versus some additional square footage. We can't fit that building. Given what that building is, I'm not sure we could move that corridor enough to make a difference because there's just not enough horizontal room between the separation of our different trenches, the force main and the water main and the electrical, and the building facade.
It's a large trench as it is now. It's an exceptionally large utility
Is
trench
it bigger?
because of the separation required.
Is that unusual? How large it is?
Well, it's unusual that it serves a couple, 3 buildings.
Right.
Okay, I mean, if they were all in the street, that utility trench would be much narrower, typically.
Yeah.
Now, that's
Right.
speaking from public works experience. Right.
It's a unique situation, the way the houses are configured. I mean, it's been here a long time, but you're right, the street goes straight down and feeds it, but then you have it's almost like a cul-de-sac sort of the way, historically, the way the houses have been built. So it kind of is a unique situation for that particular, especially with the corridor, yeah.
One of these.
One of them is the
Well.
septic system, the
Well,
well.
that septic was over here.
Oh, is over there. That's the well.
What's the other dot?
The 2 dark dots.
One was the hydrant, one was the well.
Hydrant?
Okay, so the one that's sort of curved around the edge is the well? Okay. And this probably is not an appropriate question, but, because I'm not sure we have.
Jurisdiction.
Well, to ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I assume because you put so much time into keeping basically the same shape, but a little bit different, that is of critical importance. And whereas if you were to modify the shape, which would still be a reconstruction, but not in the sense of reconstructing the same building, would it fit better? In other words, not necessarily smaller, but changing the orientation or something about it.
So,
One of the driving pieces on this was limiting the amount of disturbance on the site. That was one of those driving pieces. That is what gave us that configuration because we wanted to sit within that footprint. That was one of our huge considerations, was limiting site disturbance and therefore erosion potential. And rightly or wrongly, that's what drove us to that configuration.
Okay, so it was that, it's not that you're in love with that particular.
We are not in love with it at all. But this is one that's interesting. It's a rarity where construction approach and technique drives design. This was Cold Mountain structural engineer Moore and Sheridan and Sunset Knoll telling the architects, we need to do this to have this make sense on this site. And John and Cynthia just went along with it because they felt that was the right solution.
John, you were going to say something?
No, you've already pretty much touched on some of it, so. I mean.
It's
I
site
mean, let me-
disturbance is the driver. Is that what you're saying?
In
In determining the
Yeah,
shape?
in determining that building shape, yes.
I'm
And
just
then
trying to
that associated tree protection.
get an understanding where you're going. Okay, you're talking about somehow moving over this way a little bit. But either way you go, though, you're into these trees
Well,
by
that's why I was talking about the shape.
talking about,
If you
yeah.
could change it so that it would fit between those two root zones. But if it would mean more disturbance of the site, and that's what he's saying, that's what's driving that concern. Disturbance, not
Yeah.
necessarily of the roots, but of the site.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to make sure I understood where you were going.
Just trying to see if you could move it
What
by
have to
changing
move,
the shape.
twist and make the building different size.
Yeah.
I don't, okay.
But I don't know whether it's legitimate, based on past experience, to ask or require someone to change the shape of the building that they're trying to do.
No,
It isn't, is it?
I think you can, but you'd have to deny the project. And then they'll have to come back with a different,
Or-
that's about the way to
Yeah.
do it, the only way to do it. So in this,
Go ahead.
I just wanted one quick question. So in this corridor, then, there's a buried sewer, a buried water line, 6-inch water line, and then electrical conduit of some size. So that's represented.
In that blue corner.
So how far, I don't know which pipe is what here, so how far from that corner of the building to that inside pipe? We talking 10 feet or where?
To the pipe, to the.
Well,
pipe,
I think these must be pipes, right, Steve, they're showing here? I don't know if they're,
To that closest electrical conduit,
okay,
it's 15 feet at the garage, existing garage corner,
The existing garage.
and 21 feet at the wraparound
over here.
porch corner.
Okay,
So it's essentially running parallel. That's to the pipe itself. That's to the
Scale that.
electrical conduit itself.
Okay, I'm just trying to.
No, and that's why I
understand.
said,
Yeah,
we, accounting for some excavation room,
15 down here.
Given- trenching exercises and what's going on, and the back slopes, that's why, as part of that determination from us, if the feeling of the board was we had to do something more than what we're showing you, we felt comfortable with that slight lateral move, knowing that that might have an impact on that tree or not, but we acknowledge we could slide that a little bit.
yeah, but what you're gonna move, you're not gonna gain really that
That
much.
much
No, that's,
compared to the.
Matt? You're looking over here, so.
I'm
You
just
got a
hung up
question?
on, it's right here in our package, the criteria that we will refer to is of the proposed has located the structure to the greatest practical extent outside the shoreland zone.
Correct.
And I think what we're talking about is it could be more.
Could it be more, and what would you have to do to
Or-
produce that?
Or give up, lose, period.
Well, that is exactly what we're struggling with. Is it to the greatest extent possible? Which is what I was trying, what could you do to make it better? And you've been very clear about what your driving concerns were. But it's up to us to figure out whether that's
Motion on the, something here.
the same for us. Do you have a question? I can't open it up again yet because we're still talking, but is there more we'd like to know that would help?
I'm satisfied because I could see, I mean, we could ask questions till the cows come home. And I don't see that if we turn, twist, move, or change it, that it's gonna, gain that much. And then the impact of these two trees it could be substantial, and I mean, to move it over, the most you're gonna do is gain probably at best 10 feet off where the non-conforming to pull it out, to pull it over. And you're still gonna have probably another 10 feet or more porches into it, so you're not gaining,
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out is if you were to move it, would there still be, how much porch And it would only be porches that are in the,
Well, this is the house here, this
Right,
part.
yeah.
And that would be probably, if you can't, you ain't gonna get the whole 15 feet. You can't go right up on top of it. I don't know what the setback is. It's gotta be a minimum, what, 4 or 5 feet, right?
Yep.
So that right there, at best, is what you're gonna gain if at that. Sliding it this way.
right.
And it's not. So what we gotta do? Go
Well-
through and second public hearing?
Yeah, if the board is done asking questions right now, then I'll
Right.
reopen to the public for the second round of public questions.
There we go. Barbara's here.
Hi, Barbara's here.
Hi, my name is Barbara Spalding. I live at number 8 Dillingham Point. My parents in October of 1951 had their wedding reception in this house at 7 Dillingham Point. I grew up running in and out of this house and number 10, and the Dillingham cottages when I was young were all the original cottages. And in my lifetime, one by one, they've gone, so that the Slocums and the Spaldings would brag about being some of the 2 of the only summer cottages left on the shore, actually. And we would talk about how long we could keep these properties and what would happen when we sold them. And we all knew that when we had to sell the properties, they're summer cottages. They're built on piles of rock. They most likely would have to come down if somebody wanted to build something else. I don't think there's anything that the board can do, or even the Historic Resource Committee can do, to make someone keep a house because it's historical and it's part of Camden's history. It looks like, I've studied the packet and look at the drawings, and I've been, every day I go down and I see what they're doing down there. And the utility corridor, the trees, the shoreline, the damage from the storms, the site. And I think a site visit would show how very carefully all the professionals have looked at the site to have the least disturbance to these beautiful big oak trees that we've lost a lot of in our big storms we've had in the last several years. There used to be 3 times as many oak trees. And as much as I could wish that we had to keep this house for some reason, I think they've all been very thoughtful in what the design that they've done to try to keep it this, all of the variables that each one of you have asked about. You know, one is the rising tide, but the site, the trees, the utility corridor, the building, the existing footprint, and you know, you can talk about digging up anything, and you can talk about a tree line, and you don't want to damage the roots of the trees, but we all know the roots go out much farther than that. So they brought in a whole bunch of brand new trees when they built their house at number 10 and replaced a full-size tree when it died. And so I expect that our view will still be encumbered by their big trees. And for us, this new house is slightly less, tiny bit less of a bulk from what's there right now. So we may regain a tiny little bit of the view of the Inner Harbor that we lost when number 10 was built. As much, I would love for you to just reject them completely, even though I like my neighbors, and say that they have to renovate the existing building. But the renovation of that building most likely would cause as much disturbance as building a new building, because if it's built like ours, it's a big old heavy building on a bunch of rocks. It's difficult. Demolition is going to be difficult. But so I am in support of this plan. Sadly, wish that some little corner of it, the turret, some little corner of it could be kept and built around. But I think that they've worked very well within the confines of the space. I actually think a site, if some of you are worried, a site plan might be a really good thing to do, to take a look at, to see how closely they've kept to the buildable area. that is there. And we get to say goodbye to another historic structure. So,
Thank you very
that's-
much. And thank you for introducing what I was going to mention, but it may not be quite the right time. It's the only public, there's teeny tiny, oh, it's Kimberly's name again. Okay, so close the second public hearing. Yeah, and then final round of questions from the board. And at what point can I ask the question about a site visit?
After you do your.
Don't frown at me, John.
After your final question.
It's only a question.
No, I'm just,
So are there final questions from the board?
I think we,
Okay. All right.
May I pose a question to the board?
I think so, sure.
Given the discussion, my question back to the board is, what would you have us do differently to increase the level of comfort that you have with this proposal? What is it? Should we look at sliding that back more and just accept that we're going to deal with the effect on the oak tree?
Well, I don't mind answering
Just
your
candidly,
question first. And I can't tell you what more. I need a site visit. Diagrams don't tell me enough. Again, I don't have the same experience that these gentlemen do. But I can learn. I've done it in one other case where it made all the difference in the world. But I don't know how the other board members feel about doing a site
Okay
visit.
with that?
I'm fine. I've been there, but I would be fine with that. I would just ask a question, again, a hypothetical question. Having looked at this and thought about it, you asked us what would make us feel. I can't speak for these people, but the size of the building is really the only variable which will help me arrive at something that I could be happy with. Is that fair in saying that?
Yeah, and that's basically that's where I was driving a
Right.
few minutes ago.
It's the size of the building. If it's necessary to be that size, chips will fall where they may, but I could feel more comfortable if this building was smaller. And that's not my decision, and that's not information we're working on, but I'm sitting here, I've been here 77 years in this town, and as the neighbor there said, it's a change, and I am more than willing to accept change. But then again, how radical the change? I guess that's what I'm thinking, okay? I'm not so sure I'm supposed to say that out, but that's what I'm thinking, okay?
That's helpful. And Matt, do you have, no, but a site visit is okay with you?
It's okay with me.
And John, you're still frowning at me.
no, I'm not, I'm listening to all this, taking it in. I mean, as Ms. Wallen said, or Mrs. This, is that, I mean, she lives in the area, granted, she'd like to see the house stay, but she recognizes that things will move on. But also pointed out that the Reeds have gone through great lengths to do, I mean, to examine every part of this plan from everything you could think of. So I'm not concerned about the size of the building so much because it is a little bit smaller, yes. The roof lines are gonna be a little bit lower, the way I understand it, right?
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, I think they're demonstrating, trying to be a good neighbor, but still, they have a plan for that house. You know, it's not gonna be a house, I'll say, but it's gonna be a meeting hall and a library and stuff like that.
The reading room and a studio.
So there will really be less impact on that end of the town, end of the road, because it's private for them, isn't it? Or is it business room,
No, it's private.
private. I don't need to go for a visit, for a sidewalk.
I hear you, John.
It's just, truth with you, and this is just my thing, is that I was always told that when we gather information for these, we're gathering information at the meeting, not going off on our own to do different things, like sidewalks. So I've never done that, even when I was on the board. We stayed away from, everything was what you learn at the meeting. But I'm not, I understand why, but
Well, and it's only, to Steve's point, I'm not yet convinced that it can't be smaller. And the phrase that Matt read out, that we're being held to, the greatest extent practicable. I heard the reasons you gave for keeping it the size that it is. But, and in my own head, I'm just thinking if I went and saw, and as Ms. Spalding suggested, look at what's being done, talk to the people, I'd have a deeper understanding of why it shouldn't be smaller. But right now, based on paper in your excellent commentary, I couldn't honestly say it's the greatest extent practicable. But because of the size, which is why I asked the question earlier, what would happen if you modified the size? I mean, would the planned uses not be possible? I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to be honest about whether I'm convinced at this point.
Thank you.
I just want to make a small point.
yeah, we
I was thinking the portion of the structure that is within the 75-foot setback, that's the only thing really. It's not, if this were this part that's outside of the 75 is fine. I mean, as far as they wouldn't need to come to you, to the ZBA. They're coming to you only for this portion. I just want to make a reminder,
Yeah.
the portion that's the
But they're
porch, I guess, that's
reconstructing.
within the 75
But if
foot.
they're reconstructing the building, can it be less non-conforming? Even if it's just that small part.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, if it's just a small part, right. I'm just reminding you
off.
that it's,
And then
Right.
there's nothing in that 75-foot zone.
right. And they wouldn't even come before you.
Right.
They wouldn't have to come before you because I guess what I'm saying is I just wanted to put that reminder out there
Yep.
for you all, that it's the only thing triggering your review is the part in the set.
So what do we want to do? I know you don't want to go on the site, but I mean,
if you want to go on a sidewalk, you 3 people want to go, that's what it's all about. I'm not going to sit here and argue them. They just want to know what you're going to do after the sidewalk,
we're going to reconvene.
where and when.
Well, we have to set a time and date.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I want to ask Steve, do you think a site visit would help you either way making a decision?
No, because I'm pretty sure what's there.
Okay.
But I would ask you, would that help you? Would that help you?
I don't know, Matt,
I
would it help
would
you?
go for, absolutely, but I don't need to, but I would. Yes, I'm not objecting to it.
Well, I'm only one person who needs to, so. But we can't close the public hearing until we make a decision about the site.
But how are you going to visualize
Go on a site.
a smaller building? Because they'd have to somehow show it on the face of the earth for you. If you're going to go look at it, right? Along with moving it back against this power.
No, I think it would help if I saw, not just in a diagram, but if I saw the building and understood where the 75-foot line was. And it's
6:30. You want to go? You got permission to take us down there?
I'll do whatever the board determines is appropriate.
It's still light out for an hour and a half.
It's
or more.
true.
Let's go for a ride, road trip. Can we do that?
Yep, you can, you can, you, c-
Are you, do you have the time to do it? You said it
Yes,
wouldn't be
yes, no,
helpful.
this is paramount in what we're doing. And if we need to get down there, I'm more than willing to get down there.
Okay,
so somebody has to make a motion to continue it, don't close it, and then say we're going to come back at a certain time.
Well, will we be
John
back?
wants to come back tonight.
Yeah, we want
Yes.
to
Yeah.
finish it.
Let's want to resolve this.
Right. And it shouldn't be, I mean, once we get there, I don't think it would take that long to see what's going on, what everybody's concerned about talking about. And then we'll save our discussion to back here, so we don't
Mhm.
talk
That's
talk
right.
till midnight down there on the harbor, even though it's a beautiful spot. But
Okay.
I think we can go down there and be back by 7:30 at the latest,
At the latest, yeah.
7:15, something like that.
Okay.
And
Okay. So, do you want to make a motion that we're going to continue the public hearing?
so moved.
Second,
And reopen at 7:15,
7:15 here.
Reconvene right there.
reconvene.
Okay.
Right. And then the vote was unanimous.
Yes.
What are we doing, 4-0?
4-0.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not trying to stop, if we want to do this, it's a
Let's do it.
beautiful evening,
this is the time to do it.
right? We're fresh in our minds, as they say. So I'm not bringing all this with me, I don't think, I think I might bring,
No, we're just gonna
somebody
go.
bring one of these, that's all.
Stay in a cluster on the site visit. Don't talk to anybody outside, right?